This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring a discussion on India-Australia 2+2 dialogue and the outcomes. The participants are Skand Ranjan Tayal, former diplomat, and Manas Pratim Bhuya, journalist.
India and Australia have held their first inaugural. It is a significant move to bolster their bilateral cooperation. India and Australia have held their first 2+2 ministerial dialogue between their defense and foreign ministers on Saturday. In the talks, both sides focused on three major areas. The first was the current situation in Afghanistan. The second important focus area was to expand cooperation between Australia and India to ensure a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. And the third element of the dialogue was to strengthen the bilateral defense and strategic cooperation between the two sides. Mr. Tayal, how do you see the overall outcome of the 2+2 ministerial dialogue between India and Australia?
So first, allow me to say that India-Australia relations have come a long way in the last 2 decades. I recall that in 2005-2006, when we wanted to buy uranium from Australia, the Australian government had not allowed that. But 2009, the then Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd, visited India, and India and Australia established a strategic partnership. And last year, when there was a virtual summit between the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison and our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, this relationship was raised to comprehensive strategic partnership. And then at that meeting, it was decided that there will be a 2+2 dialogue between the defense ministers and foreign ministers of India and Australia. Here, we also must appreciate the importance of 2+2 dialogue because India has this dialogue with very few countries, including United States of America. And this really shows a level of relationship which is above the level of strategic partnership because it is more action oriented. And it is very heartening that even under the COVID restrictions, as our listeners know, Australia has very, very strict COVID restrictions. The Foreign Minister of Australia, Marise Payne, and Defence Minister of Australia, Peter Dutton, came to India and had this 2+2 dialogue yesterday with our External Affairs Minister, Sri Jaishankar, and our Defence Minister, Sri Rajnath Singh. And in any strategic dialogue these days, of course, Afghanistan is at the top, not because of the importance of Afghanistan as a country, but the danger that it may again become a sanctuary, a hideout for terrorists. So as you said, the top of the agenda item was the situation in Afghanistan, and the Foreign Minister of Australia, Marise Payne, said that Afghanistan can never again become a safe haven for terrorism. And this is in tune with our statements both in Delhi and in New York. And our Foreign Minister quoted the UN Security Council Resolution 2593, which was adopted on 30th August under India's chairmanship of the UN Security Council, that Afghanistan soil should not in any manner again become supportive of terrorism. So there our interests converge, and India and Australia will work closely and will observe very carefully how the new government of Afghanistan functions. Then the second issue, which is and very, very important, is cooperation in the area of Indo-Pacific. And both countries are very emphatic that there should be free and open and prosperous and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. There are misgivings on this account. Both India and Australia have been targets of Chinese expansionist policies and aggressive diplomacy. India has seen how in Eastern Ladakh the Chinese have indulged in very expansionist and aggressive actions which have been very robustly repulsed by India's armed forces. And Australia has seen a very virulent form of wolf warriorship. That is, their diplomats are becoming unnecessarily aggressive when they make statements in Australia. And when Australia questioned the origin of COVID-19 virus and suggested that it might have come from China, then there was very strong retaliatory action on trade issues by China. So this wolf warrior diplomacy Australia has been a victim of. It was not specifically mentioned yesterday in the press conference, but certainly in the dialogue it would have been very, very important. And the third point which Manas, you mentioned, that bilateral defense and strategic cooperation would be strengthened. In fact, that is the way to go. And this 2+2 dialogue is action oriented. And we have seen Australia participated in the Malabar exercises. Australian Navy also participated along with the navies of India, United States and Japan just a couple of months back. And Australia invited India to participate in a major exercise which Australia will hold in the year 2023, 2 years from now, which is called Exercise Talisman Sabre. And the Australian Defence Minister Peter Dutton also announced that they will increase defence and diplomatic representation in India. They already have a military wing in the High Commission of Australia in India, but that would be strengthened. And Defence Minister Peter Dutton also said that Australia-India defence relationship is at historic high. So on all the 3 points, there was a meeting of minds, and it is a very action-oriented outcome of the 2+2 dialogue yesterday.
Mr. Tayal, another important point that the Foreign Minister as well as Mr. Pan made was that the commitment to deepen the trade relationship, the trade basket between Australia and India. So the joint statement released late last night mentioned that the ministers committed to deepening Australia and India's economic relationship under the comprehensive partnership and appreciated the renewed commitment and progress made by both sides to achieve an early harvest announcement by December 2021 on an interim trade agreement to further boost trade. And this interim agreement would be followed by a comprehensive bilateral economic cooperation agreement. So how do you see this commitment to have an early harvest trade pact to be followed by a comprehensive economic partnership agreement between India and Australia to boost trade and economic engagement?
This is a very important policy statement by the ministers of the two sides. As we have seen, however, there are some differences in the approach towards both a free trade agreement and comprehensive economic partnership agreement, particularly from our dairy sector. As we know, Australia and New Zealand, they are very strong in dairy products, whether it is milk, cheese, butter, etc. And the price of these products is very, very low. And they want access to India's market at a low customs duty, which will harm the interests of millions of our dairy farmers whose prosperity rests on the milk products. In fact, India has been buying gas and mineral products from Australia, and some Indian big groups have been investing also in Australia's primary sector. The trade is about 23 billion US dollars. It is a very good foundation to go forward, but there are sectors where India necessarily has to be careful, because India is a agriculture dominant economy, and in the rural areas, as our government has declared that India wants to double the income of the farmers by 2025, a part of it comes from milk products, and that will need to be protected. So let us see how it goes. If this political commitment at the highest level, I am confident that the early harvest, which is to be announced by the end of this year, some products will be identified on both sides, which will be a win-win situation for the exports of both.
Mr. Tayal, another key aspect of yesterday's 2+2 dialogue was the common commitment by both Australia and India to fight the menace of terrorism. They strongly condemn terrorism in all the forms and manifestations, wherever, whenever, and by whomsoever committed. and they condemn the use of terrorist proxies for cross-border terrorism in a very oblique reference, I guess, to Pakistan. The minister underlined the urgent need for all countries to take immediate, sustained, verifiable, irreversible action to ensure that no territory under their control is used for terrorist attacks. Particularly, Australia reiterated its condemnation of terrorist attacks in India, including 26/11 Mumbai attack, Pathankot attack, Pulwama attacks, and reiterated its support for the people and the government of India in the fight against terrorism. How do you see Australia very openly coming out for India's support and calling for a sustained global effort to contain terrorism, to deal with terrorism?
Both India and Australia have been victims of terrorism. We all recall how hundreds of Australians were killed in Bali when the Indonesian terrorists, and they were international terrorists, they attacked some nightclubs and bars in Bali. Since then, Australia has become very conscious of the menace of terrorism, which affect the entire region of East Asia, whether it is Indonesia, whether it is Philippines, whether it is India. And this is very important that specific instances of terrorism in India have been mentioned in the joint document. But I have seen in my diplomatic experience that many of our friendly countries in private talk, they condemn Pakistan, that all this terrorism is emanating from Pakistan. But the specific instances of terrorism which have affected India, like the 26 November 2008 and Pulwama, etc., they are reluctant to include them in the joint statement. So I would say two things. One, that the complicity of Pakistan, the support of Pakistan to Taliban and to this entire new structure which has come in Afghanistan is now very clear to every democratic country. The question of how to deal with it. And unless all the democratic countries, all the countries of the world which are progressive, which are forward-looking, which believe in human rights, and which are members of G20, Australia is also a member of G20, India is, unless we all come together and put pressure on Pakistan, both moral pressure, economic pressure, only then Pakistan will mend its ways and we can expect some cooperation from Pakistan. Otherwise, it will continue to deny that it is helping Afghanistan and continue to close its eyes for if there are sanctuaries of terrorism in Afghanistan or in the FPAC region, which is Afghanistan-Pakistan region, the bordering region. So this pressure is very, very significant for India and for the region and for the world.
Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, in his comments yesterday, invited Australian industry to take advantage of India's liberalized foreign direct investment policies in the defense sector. How do you see this new initiative of co-production and co-development of key military equipment by both the countries?
This is a very important policy objective of India, that in the last 7 decades, the production of defense equipment, defense platforms in India has been sluggish. And we are dependent on imports of defense equipment and fully made equipment from Russia, from US, from France, from Israel, etc. And now the government wants partners that other countries should come and manufacture in India. At least 70% of the value addition should be in India, and 25-30% can come from that partner country, because the core technology no company will be willing to transfer. So that is understandable. And in that context, Raksha Mantri Shri Rajnath Singh's invitation to Australian industry, which is a very highly advanced in science and technology, is very important, and one could see some results in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Tayal.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on India-Australia 2+2 dialogue and the outcomes. The participants were Skand Ranjan Tayal, former diplomat, and Manas Pratim Bhuya, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.